The oath of a human. Smoke filled the air. The sky, once bright with twin suns, was now black with the ashes of war. Fires burned across the battlefield, lighting the ruined city with an eerie orange glow. The sound of distant gunfire and screaming echoed through the empty streets. Sarek hid behind a broken wall, his small hands shaking. His dark blue eyes, wide with fear, searched the surroundings for any sign of safety. But there was none. His people were gone, either dead or taken by the invaders. He was alone. Then heavy footsteps approached. Sarek's heart pounded. He pressed himself against the cold stone, trying to make himself as small as possible. A shadow loomed over him. A massive figure stood there. A Gregorian warlord, armored in dark steel, his reptilian skin covered in fresh battle scars. His red eyes glowed like burning coals. He gripped a long, jagged blade, stained with the blood of Sarek's people. The warlord smirked, a little survivor. His deep voice was filled with amusement. He lifted his blade. "You won't last long." Sarek shut his eyes. He didn't want to see the end. A sudden roar tore through the battlefield. Boom! Something crashed into the ground between them, kicking up dust and debris. Sarek gasped as the Gregorian warlord stumbled back, shielding his face. When the dust settled, a human stood there, the human guardian. The figure was tall, dressed in battle-worn armor that was scratched and scorched from countless fights. His helmet was missing, revealing a rugged face with dark eyes that burned with determination. He held a plasma rifle in one hand and a combat knife in the other. Sarek had never seen a human this close before. His people had spoken of them. Fragile beings, weak compared to the mighty Gregorians. But the one standing before him looked anything but weak. The warlord growled, regaining his balance. "You dare interfere, human." The human didn't answer. He simply raised his rifle and fired. A blue energy blast struck the warlord's chest, sending him crashing into the rubble. But Gregorians were tough. He groaned, shaking off the pain, and rose again. "You should have run," the warlord sneered. He charged forward, swinging his massive blade. The human barely dodged in time. The blade sliced through the air, missing his head by inches. He rolled to the side, then lunged forward with his knife, striking the warlord's exposed arm. The Gregorian roared in pain. Furious, he swung again, but the human was faster, smarter. He ducked, then fired another shot, this time at the warlord's knee. With a howl of rage, the warlord fell. His wounded leg collapsed beneath him. He gasped, trying to stand, but the human placed his boot on the warlord's chest, pushing him down. "You should have run," the human said coldly. Then, with one final shot, he ended it, a promise made. Sarek couldn't move. He had just seen something impossible. A human had defeated a Gregorian warlord, alone. The human turned to him. His eyes softened, but his face remained serious. "Are you hurt?" Sarek shook his head, too scared to speak. The human crouched down. "It's okay, kid. You're safe now." Sarek hesitated. Who are you?" The human glanced at the burning city, his jaw tightening. Then he looked back at the trembling child and gave a small, reassuring nod. "My name is Commander Kane," he said. "And I promise you, no harm will come to you." His voice was firm, unshakable. For the first time in hours, Sarek felt something other than fear. He felt hope. But then, a distant rumbling filled the air. The ground trembled. In the sky, dark shapes appeared. Gregorian reinforcements, warships. Kane looked up, eyes narrowing. "We need to move. Now." He grabbed Sarek's hand, pulling him to his feet. The boy followed without question. The battle wasn't over yet, and the war had only just begun. A human against an army. The war isn't over yet. The distant thunder of engines rumbled through the sky. Shadows stretched over the ruined city as massive Gregorian warships descended from the clouds, their metal hulls gleaming under the dim light of the burning battlefield. The air was thick with the scent of smoke, plasma fire, and death. Commander Kane tightened his grip on his rifle. His dark eyes flicked toward the child beside him. Sarek, small and fragile, clutched his tattered cloak, his blue skin pale from fear. The boy's people were gone, his home reduced to ash. He had no one left, except Kane. And Kane had made a promise. No harm will come to you. But now, with an entire Kragorian army descending from the sky, that promise would be difficult to keep. The hunt begins. A Kragorian dropship hovered over the ruins, releasing a squad of heavily armored soldiers. Their red eyes scanned the area as their leader, a brutish commander with black armor and a deep scar across his jaw, gave the order. Find the boy. Kill the human. Their boots thudded against the cracked pavement as they spread out, their weapons humming with deadly energy. Kane and Sarek crouched behind the wreckage of an old transport vehicle. The human exhaled slowly, his sharp mind already calculating their chances. 6 soldiers, advanced weapons, aerial support, no backup. Kane had faced worse. He turned to Sarek. We can't outrun them, kid, but we can outsmart them. The boy's eyes widened. But there are too many. Kane gave a small smirk. There are always too many. He reached into his belt, pulling out a small metal device, a compact EMP grenade. He clicked the activation switch, its blue light pulsing softly. Cover your ears. Sarek obeyed, pressing his hands to his head. Kane lobbed the grenade toward the enemy squad. Boom! A sudden, blinding shockwave tore through the air. The Kragorians staggered back as their visor screens flickered, their weapons short-circuiting for a few precious seconds. And that was all the time Kane needed. 1 against 6. The human moved like lightning, emerging from the shadows with his rifle raised. He fired 2 clean shots, one into the chest of the closest Kragorian, the second into the leg of another. The first dropped instantly. The second howled in pain. The others recovered fast. Too fast. One of them raised his plasma cannon, but Kane was already moving, dodging behind a collapsed wall as a stream of blue fire blasted past him. The heat seared his arm, but he gritted his teeth and kept going. A second Kragorian lunged at him, swinging a vibro blade the size of Kane's leg. Kane ducked, rolling under the attack, then slammed the butt of his rifle into the alien's jaw. The Kragorian stumbled, and in one swift motion, Kane pulled his knife and drove it into the creature's exposed throat. 3 down. The remaining soldiers regrouped. One of them snarled, "You fight like a dying animal, human." Kane wiped blood from his knife. Then you should be afraid of dying animals. The battle wasn't over. Not yet. Sarek's first fight. While Kane fought, Sarek watched in horror. He had never seen a human fight before. Not like this. His people had always said humans were weaker, that they lacked the strength of Kragorians or the intelligence of the Varric. But this human was different. He wasn't just fighting. He was winning. Then something moved behind him. A 7th soldier, hidden in the shadows. A sniper. The Kragorian raised his weapon, aiming directly at Kane's back. Sarek's heart pounded. He looked at Kane, then at the sniper. If he didn't do something, the human who saved him would die. He had no weapon, no training, no strength. But he had one chance. With a burst of courage, Sarek grabbed a jagged piece of metal from the rubble. He ran forward, throwing it with all his strength. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough. The metal shard struck the sniper's hand, making him flinch. His shot missed by inches, burning into the ground beside Kane. Kane turned just in time, spotting the sniper. With one swift motion, he fired. The last enemy fell. The promise holds. Kane stood in the silence, breathing heavily. His armor was scorched, his face covered in dirt and blood. Then he looked at Sarek. The boy was shaking, staring at his own hands. "You did good, kid," Kane said, walking over. That was quick thinking. Sarek looked up, his eyes still filled with shock. I didn't mean to. I didn't want you to die. Cain knelt down, putting a hand on his shoulder. His grip was firm, but not harsh. That's the first rule of war, he said. You protect your own. Sarek swallowed hard. Is that why you're protecting me? Cain didn't answer right away. His gaze drifted to the sky, where the Kragorian warships were still circling. This isn't over, he muttered. More would come. Stronger, smarter, angrier. But no matter what, Cain knew one thing. He had made a promise. And he never broke a promise. Escape into the void. Nowhere left to run. The city was dying. Flames crawled through the ruins, consuming what little remained. The air was thick with smoke and death, the scent of burned metal and scorched bodies twisting through the wind. Somewhere in the distance, a Kragorian war horn echoed, a deep guttural sound that sent chills down Sarek's spine. They were coming. Commander Cain pulled the boy forward, moving fast through the wreckage of a once great civilization. His boots crunched against shattered glass and debris, his rifle clutched tightly in his hands. He had fought 6 Kragorian soldiers and won, but he knew better than to celebrate. That fight was just the beginning. Above them, the sky rumbled. A massive warship hovered like a predator, scanning the ruins for any survivors. The enemy wasn't searching for just anyone. They were hunting them. Sarek gasped as his legs nearly gave out beneath him. He had never run this much in his life, and exhaustion was clawing at him. But Cain didn't let go. Almost there, kid, the human said. His voice was calm, controlled, but Sarek could hear the urgency beneath the words. Where are we going? Sarek asked between ragged breaths. Cain didn't look back. The spaceport. The boy's eyes widened. You mean, we're leaving the planet? That's the idea. Sarek hesitated. His world was in ruins, his people gone. He had nowhere left to go, yet the idea of leaving felt wrong, like stepping into the unknown. But a plasma blast exploded behind them. The force sent Sarek stumbling forward, his ears ringing. Cain yanked him up and pressed him against the wall of a collapsed building. No time for doubts, kid. Sarek nodded, swallowing his fear. Then they ran. The path is blocked. They reached the outskirts of the abandoned spaceport, or what was left of it. Twisted metal, burning wreckage, and shattered ships littered the area. Once, this had been a thriving hub of interstellar travel. Now, it was a graveyard. But there was still hope. Near the edge of the landing pads, a small freighter sat intact, its hull blackened but functional. Cain exhaled. That's our way out. Sarek's relief was short-lived. The boy grabbed Cain's arm, pointing toward the ship's entrance. A Kragorian squad stood guard. 5 armored soldiers, each carrying high-powered plasma rifles, scanning the area like hunters waiting for prey. Cain cursed under his breath. The Kragorians weren't stupid. They had guessed his plan. And now, if he wanted that ship, he would have to take it. A human strategy. Cain crouched behind the remains of a broken shuttle, pulling Sarek down beside him. Listen carefully, he said. I need you to trust me. The boy nodded, his small hands shaking. Cain pulled out a small device from his belt. A remote detonator. He pointed toward a wrecked fuel transport near the enemy. When I give the signal, you press this button. Got it. Sarek swallowed. What does it do? Cain smirked. It'll give us a distraction. The boy nodded, gripping the device tightly. Cain then checked his weapon. 5 enemies. 1 magazine left. Not enough bullets for all of them. But he didn't need bullets. He needed time. The soldier took a deep breath, then moved. A human against the impossible. Cain sprinted from cover, rifle raised. The Kragorian guards spotted him instantly. There, the human. Plasma fire tore through the air, searing past him. He didn't stop. He dropped to one knee and fired. One shot. A Kregorian soldier staggered back, a burning hole in his chest. 4 left. A second soldier charged, raising his blade. Kane sidestepped, slamming the barrel of his rifle into the enemy's skull. The Kregorian crumpled. 3 left. The others fell back, firing wildly. Kane ducked behind a cargo crate, breathing hard. He couldn't keep this up. Sarek. Now. The boy pressed the button. Boom. The abandoned fuel transport erupted into a fiery explosion, sending a shockwave across the landing pad. The Kregorians were thrown off balance, their visors blinded by the blast. Kane didn't hesitate. He surged forward, grabbing Sarek's wrist. Go. Get to the ship. They ran as the last 2 Kregorians recovered, but it was too late. Kane reached the freighter's ramp and slammed his hand against the controls. The doors hissed open. Inside. Now. Sarek rushed in as Kane turned, raising his rifle one last time. He fired. 1 shot, 2 shots. The last enemies fell. Then, without another second to spare, Kane boarded the ship and sealed the door. They had made it. But the battle was far from over. Escape into the stars. Kane stormed into the cockpit, throwing himself into the pilot's seat. The control panels were cracked, but still functional. Sarek clung to the doorway. Can you fly this thing? Kane smirked. Guess we're about to find out. He slammed his fist on the ignition switch. The ship rumbled to life, its engines coughing before stabilizing into a deep hum. Outside, the Kregorian warship had noticed them. Hold on, kid. The freighter launched into the sky, metal groaning under the force. Within seconds, they were soaring over the burning city. A warning siren blared. They're locking onto us. Sarek shouted. Kane's hands flew over the controls. Not for long. The Kregorian warship fired. A plasma missile streaked toward them. Kane yanked the controls. A sharp dive, a sudden roll. The missile grazed the hull, sending sparks through the cockpit. Sarek screamed, gripping the seat. That was too close. Kane grinned. We're still alive, aren't we? The freighter broke through the atmosphere, the burning world fading behind them. For the first time since the battle began, Kane let out a breath. They were free. Or so he thought. The price of a promise. The cold silence of space. The battle was behind them. The burning world of Xal'tari shrank in the distance, its charred surface barely visible beyond the ship's reinforced cockpit window. The stars stretched infinitely in all directions, offering a brief moment of peace. Inside the cockpit, Commander Kane exhaled, his grip relaxing on the ship's worn-out flight controls. The freighter's engines hummed softly, stabilizing after their rough escape. They had made it. Or so he thought. Beside him, Sarek still trembled, his small hands clenched into fists. His wide blue eyes remained locked on the viewport, as if expecting the Kregorians to burst from the void at any second. Kane glanced at him. Breathe, kid. We're out. Sarek barely nodded. Where do we go now? Kane ran a hand through his sweat-drenched hair. First, we figure out where the hell we are. He pressed a few buttons on the navigation panel, bringing up the star map. The screen flickered. Damage. Great. He sighed. All right, new plan. We head toward the nearest human outpost, fix this ship and... A loud beep interrupted him. A proximity alert. Something was out there. The ghost in the dark. Kane's instincts kicked in. His hands flew over the controls, adjusting the ship's sensors. A massive shadow loomed ahead. Not a Kregorian warship, not a human vessel. Something else. Sarek leaned forward. What is that? Kane's jaw tightened. Don't know. But it's not drifting like debris. Then, a voice crackled over the comms, deep and mechanical. Commander Kane, we've been expecting you. Sarek's breath hitched. They know your name. Kane's stomach twisted. This wasn't random. Someone had been waiting for them. Who am I speaking to? He asked, his voice steady. Silence. Then, prepare for docking. Kane grabbed the thruster controls, preparing to gun it out of there. But before he cooled, thunk. A tractor beam locked onto their ship. The freighter lurched, pulled toward the massive vessel like a helpless insect caught in a spider's web. The engines whined, struggling, but it was no use. They were trapped. A new enemy, or an old one. Kane gritted his teeth as the ship was dragged into the massive vessel's docking bay. The moment they landed, metal clamps locked onto their freighter. No escape. The doors hissed open. Kane stood first, positioning himself in front of Sarek. His hand hovered over his pistol, ready for a fight. The docking bay was dimly lit, the walls covered in strange, foreign markings. The air smelled of machine oil and something faintly metallic, like blood. A group of figures emerged from the shadows. They weren't Gregorian. They weren't human. They were something in between. The Forgotten Ones. The tallest figure stepped forward. Its armor was sleek, a mix of organic plating and mechanical implants. Its face was hidden behind a helmet with glowing white slits for eyes. When it spoke, its voice was unnaturally smooth, almost human but wrong. You carry something valuable, Kane. Kane's grip on his weapon tightened, not sure what you're talking about. The figure gestured toward Sarek. This child, do you know what he really is? Kane frowned. He's just a kid. That's all that matters. The figure chuckled softly. No, he is much more. Sarek shrank behind Kane, his breathing uneven. Kane stepped forward, his voice low. You're going to let us walk out of here. Now. The figure tilted its head. Are you willing to bet his life on that? Kane didn't hesitate. Yes. A war of secrets. The alien leader sighed. Then, with a small motion of its hand, the surrounding guards lowered their weapons. Very well. But first, let me tell you a story. Kane narrowed his eyes but said nothing. The figure continued. Centuries ago, before humans even reached the stars, before the Gregorians became conquerors, there was a war between beings who understood the universe in ways no one else could. Sarek shivered. What does that have to do with me? The figure knelt in front of the boy. Because, little one, you are the last heir of that war. Silence. Kane's fingers twitched near his gun. Explain. Now. The figure nodded. Sarek's people were never meant to be destroyed. They were meant to be controlled. The boy's eyes widened in horror. My people were slaves. Not slaves. Weapons. The words hit like a gunshot. Kane's mind raced. The Gregorians hadn't wiped out Sarek's race just for conquest. They had done it to erase the past. And now he was holding the last living piece of that past. The price of a promise. Kane exhaled, forcing himself to stay calm. Why do you care? He asked. If you wanted him dead, you could have let the Gregorians do it. The figure stood. Because unlike them, we see potential. We can protect him. Train him. Kane shook his head. Not happening. The figure smiled beneath its mask. You misunderstand, Kane. This is not a choice. The doors hissed shut behind them. Guards stepped forward. Weapons raised. Sarek clutched Kane's sleeve, his small frame trembling. Kane. The human stood firm. He had faced worse. And he wasn't about to break his promise now. The guardians passed. A cage in the void. The walls of the interrogation chamber were cold, metallic, and eerily quiet. The dim glow of artificial lights flickered, casting long shadows across the floor. The air was stale, thick with the scent of old metal. And something else. Blood. Kane had been in places like this before. He sat in the center of the room, his hands bound behind the chair by energy restraints. Across from him, standing with calculated stillness, was the armored figure who had captured him and Sarek. The alien's white glowing eyes watched him without blinking, like a predator studying its prey. Sarek wasn't there. That fact burned into Kane's mind like a branding iron. Where did they take the kid? He shifted slightly, testing the strength of the restraints. Solid, but nothing was impossible. The alien finally spoke. "You don't remember me, do you?" Kane exhaled sharply. "I don't remember a lot of dead men." The alien chuckled. "I am not dead. And neither is your past." Something about the way he said it sent a chill through Kane's spine. This wasn't just about Sarek. This was about him. A past that won't stay buried. The alien walked slowly around the room, speaking with the patience of someone who already knew the outcome. "You are Kane Velasquez, former captain in the Terran Special Operations Unit, a soldier of Earth, a weapon forged in the fires of war." Kane said nothing. "You and your team were known for one thing: doing the impossible." The alien turned, locking eyes with him. "Isn't that right?" Kane's jaw tightened. "What do you want?" The alien leaned forward. "I want to remind you." A panel on the wall hummed, and suddenly, a holographic projection flickered to life. The image showed a world Kane had tried to forget, a planet bathed in the orange glow of war. Bodies littered the battlefield. Smoke curled in the sky as explosions shattered the land. It was an old mission, one that had never made it into any official records. Classified. Erased. And yet here it was. Kane clenched his fists. "Where did you get this?" The alien ignored the question. "Your squad was sent to this planet to secure an artifact. A relic of a forgotten war." Kane's mind flashed back. He remembered now. The mission had gone wrong. His entire team had been ambushed. They were supposed to retrieve intelligence. Instead, they had found something else. Something alive. The alien pointed to the screen. "You were the only survivor. Do you remember what you saw?" Kane did remember, and for the first time in years, he wished he didn't. The truth about Sarek. Kane exhaled, shaking his head. "This isn't about me. It's about Sarek." The alien tilted its head. "You're mistaken. It's about both of you." The screen changed, showing an image of Sarek's homeworld. Before the war, a beautiful planet, lush with glowing rivers and golden cities, a civilization that had been wiped out. "Your mission," the alien continued, "was never about intelligence gathering. The Terran Command knew something was hidden on that world. Something valuable." Kane frowned. "What are you saying?" The alien turned, voice cold. "The humans knew about Sarek's people long before the war started, and they wanted them controlled, just like the Kragorians did." Kane froze. "No, that couldn't be true. You're lying." The alien smiled beneath its mask. "Am I?" The projection changed again, this time showing a document from the Terran High Command. Kane's own clearance code was at the bottom. His heart sank. It was a human order. A directive. Project is TARBLOD. Designation: Velkarnine. Objective: capture and contain potential subjects for augmentation and strategic warfare. Failure is not an option. Kane's breath caught in his throat. His people had known, the entire time. They weren't rescuing anyone. They were hunting them. The betrayal runs deep. Kane's mind raced. He had fought for Earth, for his people. But this, had he been a pawn all along? The alien leaned closer. "Do you understand now, Kane? The Kragorians destroyed Sarek's people, but your own kind wanted to turn them into weapons." Kane clenched his fists so tight that his knuckles turned white. "You knew," the alien whispered. "Deep down, you always knew." Kane shook his head, whispering, "No." He had made a promise. He had sworn to protect Sarek, to keep him safe. Had he been protecting him from his own kind this entire time? The escape plan. The alien straightened. "We have an offer, Kane. Give us the boy. He is important. He is powerful, and he is not meant for you." Kane looked up, and then he grinned. "Go to hell. Without warning, Kane twisted his arms, dislocating his own wrist to slip from the energy restraints. The pain shot through his nerves, but he didn't care. The alien's eyes widened. In one fluid motion, Kane surged forward. His boot slammed into the alien's chest, sending him crashing into the control panel. Sparks erupted as Kane grabbed the fallen guard's weapon. The doors burst open. More guards rushed in. Kane fired 3 quick shots, dropping 2 of them before diving behind cover. He grabbed a fallen blade and sliced through the last guard in a single motion. Then, without waiting, he bolted into the corridor. Find Sarek. Get the hell out. The Guardian's choice. Alarms blared across the alien ship. Kane didn't care. He sprinted down the halls, kicking open doors, searching for Sarek. Then he found him. The boy was strapped to a chair, surrounded by strange floating machines scanning his DNA. His eyes were wide with fear. Kane. Kane raised his stolen weapon. 1 shot. The machines exploded in sparks. He rushed forward, pulling Sarek free. You okay, kid? Sarek nodded, shaking. They said I was something else. Kane crouched, meeting the boy's frightened gaze. You're not a weapon. You're not a tool. You're a survivor. Sarek's hands tightened into fists. Kane smiled. Now let's get out of here. Behind them, the alarms grew louder. The enemy was closing in. Kane turned to the boy. Can you run? Sarek nodded. Kane smirked. Then let's make them regret letting us live. And together, they ran. The final stand. A race against death. The alarms screamed through the corridors, a wailing symphony of chaos. Red warning lights flashed along the dark metallic walls as Kane and Sarek ran, their breaths ragged, their bodies driven by sheer survival. They had minutes, maybe less. Behind them, the alien ship's security forces were closing in. Boots pounded against the floor. Voices barked orders in an alien tongue. The hum of charged plasma rifles filled the air. Kane's mind raced. Where was the hangar? He had no map, no guide, just instinct and the unwavering promise he had made to the boy running beside him. No harm will come to you. He meant it. But this time, it might cost him his life. The enemy makes their move. A voice crackled over the ship's intercom. Kane Velasquez, you cannot escape. It was the alien leader, the one who had captured him. His voice was eerily calm, as if this wasn't a pursuit, but a game. You were a soldier once. You understand strategy. So ask yourself, where can you run? Kane gritted his teeth. He hated when his enemies talked too much. He grabbed Sarek's arm and pulled him into a side corridor, just as a squad of alien guards rounded the corner. Plasma fire erupted behind them, scorching the walls. Too close. Sarek yelped as Kane slammed them both behind a supply crate. He turned, quickly checking his weapon. 5 shots left. 5 enemies. Kid, Kane whispered, keeping his voice steady. Do you trust me? Sarek nodded, terrified but determined. Kane smirked. Then when I say run, you run. Don't look back. The boy swallowed hard. What about you? Kane loaded his weapon. I'll catch up. It was a lie. Sarek knew it, but he didn't argue. A human against an army. The moment the footsteps drew closer, Kane moved. He rolled out from behind cover and fired 3 quick shots. One hit the first alien in the throat. The second tore through another's visor. The third sent the third guard crashing into the wall, dead. The remaining 2 reacted fast, firing at him. Kane barely dodged, rolling across the floor and grabbing a fallen shock baton. He surged forward, dodging another blast, and slammed the weapon into the 4th guard's ribs. A surge of energy ripped through the alien's armor. He screamed and collapsed. Only one left. The final guard hesitated for half a second. It was all Kane needed. With a brutal efficiency, he grabbed the alien's own rifle and used it against him. 5 enemies. 5 dead. and Kane was still standing. But he didn't have time to enjoy the victory. "Kid, run." Sarek hesitated, looking at the carnage, then took off down the corridor. Kane followed right after him. The hangar, and the final barrier. They burst through a massive doorway. And finally, they saw it. The hangar, their way out. The freighter they had stolen sat in the middle of the docking bay, still locked in place by massive clamps. Sarek's face lit up. "We made it." Kane wasn't celebrating yet. A new sound filled the air. Heavy, slow footsteps. From the shadows at the far end of the hangar, he emerged. The alien commander. No armor, no weapons, just him. "You fought well, Kane," the alien said, his voice echoing. "But this is where your story ends." Kane raised his weapon. "I've heard that before." The alien's eyes burned white. "Not from me." Then he moved. And for the first time in Kane's life, he wasn't fast enough. A fight like no other. The alien commander wasn't like the others. He crossed the distance in a blur, moving with inhuman speed. Before Kane could fire, a hand wrapped around his throat and lifted him into the air. Pain exploded in Kane's ribs as he was slammed against the metal wall. His vision blurred. "Dan, he's strong." The alien leaned in close. "Do you understand now? You never had a chance." Kane gritted his teeth. "Yeah." His free hand grabbed the alien's wrist. Twisting. Snap. The alien snarled in pain. Kane used the moment to kick him in the chest and break free. The fight was back on. Sarek's awakening. Sarek watched in horror. Kane was fighting with everything he had, but the alien was too fast, too strong. Kane dodged a strike, only to get caught by a second hit. Blood sprayed from his mouth as he crashed into the ground. The alien stepped over him. "You are not enough." Sarek felt something deep inside him stir, a feeling he didn't understand. He had been running, hiding, surviving, but not anymore. Something inside him awakened. The air shifted. The temperature dropped. A low hum filled the room. The alien commander froze. Then, slowly, he turned to look at the child. Sarek's eyes were glowing. The last stand. The alien took a step back. "Impossible." Kane coughed, looking up. "Kid." Sarek didn't answer. He was somewhere else. The air around him rippled, and suddenly, the entire hangar shook. The ship clamps snapped open. Metal walls bent inward. Lights flickered as an unseen force rippled through the ship. The alien commander snarled, stepping toward Sarek. "You don't understand what you are." Sarek raised a hand. And then, a massive shockwave sent the alien flying. The force ripped through the hangar, shaking the entire ship. Kane shielded his eyes. "Kid, whatever you're doing, do it fast." Sarek's voice was different when he spoke. "We're leaving." Kane didn't argue. He grabbed the kid, sprinted to the freighter, and jumped inside. Sarek's glowing eyes flickered as he turned toward the alien commander one last time. Boom! A final blast of energy shattered the docking bay doors, sending their ship into open space. As the freighter's engines roared to life, Kane looked back. The alien commander was still alive. But he was kneeling now, watching them escape. And for the first time, Kane thought he saw fear in the enemy's eyes. A promise kept. The aftermath of power. The freighter tumbled through space, the remnants of the explosion still burning in the void behind them. Kane could feel the tremors of the ship's damaged hull, hear the warning alarms screaming about oxygen levels, hull integrity, and engine strain. But all of it faded into the background, drowned out by the sight in front of him. Sarek sat in the co-pilot's seat, staring at his own hands. They were still glowing. The air around the boy shimmered, charged with an unseen force. His breath was uneven, his face frozen in shock, as if he himself couldn't believe what had just happened. Kane swallowed hard. He had seen a lot of things in his life, but this This was something beyond human understanding. "Kid," Kane said, his voice softer than usual. "You okay?" Sarek didn't answer immediately. He flexed his fingers, watching as small trails of golden energy flickered along his skin, like distant stars coming alive. Then he whispered, "What am I?" Kane exhaled. He didn't have an answer. But they were about to find out. Nowhere is safe. The freighter's engine sputtered, trying to stabilize in the endless black of space. Kane pulled himself into the pilot's seat, ignoring the pain in his ribs. The fight with the alien commander had left its mark. His entire body ached, and he was pretty sure something inside him was still bleeding. But right now, none of that mattered. The enemy ship was still out there. Kane's fingers moved quickly over the controls, pushing the thrusters to maximum. They needed distance. Fast. Sarek finally turned his glowing eyes toward Kane. "He's still alive, isn't he?" Kane clenched his jaw. "Yeah." Sarek swallowed hard. He had thrown everything at the alien commander. The explosion should have killed him. But somehow, deep inside, he knew the fight wasn't over. The enemy had let them escape. Why? Before Kane could answer, the ship's long-range scanners blared. Something was coming. Kane's gut twisted as he looked at the screen. A fleet. Not just one ship. A fleet. Kregorian warships, 3 of them, approaching fast. Sarek's hands trembled. They found us. Kane's fists tightened around the controls. No, they were already waiting. The entire galaxy knew about them now, and no one was coming to save them. The call of the void. Kane cursed under his breath. He had barely patched up the ship. It wouldn't survive a direct fight. Options. He needed options. He quickly scanned the star map. There. A nearby asteroid field, thick enough to disrupt enemy scanners and weapons tracking. If they could reach it, they might have a chance. Kane punched the thrusters, sending the ship surging forward. The Kregorian fleet immediately responded. A rain of plasma fire erupted from their warships. Boom! The freighter shook violently. Sparks exploded from the controls. Sarek gripped the edges of his seat. "They're too fast." Kane gritted his teeth. "Then we go faster." The asteroid field loomed ahead, a chaotic cluster of floating death traps. One wrong move, one bad calculation, and they'd be ripped apart by rock and gravity. But Kane had no choice. He dove straight into it. The hunter becomes the hunted. The Kregorian ships hesitated. Their massive warships weren't built for tight maneuvers. They couldn't follow easily, but that didn't mean they weren't trying. Kane weaved through the debris, dodging colossal asteroids by mere meters, his hands moving with calculated precision over the controls. Sarek had never seen anything like it. The human wasn't just flying. He was dancing with death. Kane's voice was tense but steady. "Kid, I need you to do something." Sarek snapped out of his trance. "Do what?" Kane pointed at a small device blinking on the control panel. "That's the ship's auxiliary power module. The last shot knocked it loose. I need you to reactivate it manually." Sarek hesitated. "I don't know how." Kane glanced at him, eyes serious. "Then learn. Fast." The Kregorian fleet had found a new tactic. They weren't following directly anymore. They were shooting into the asteroid field, hoping to flush them out. If Sarek didn't get that power module working, they wouldn't have enough boost to make it to the other side. Sarek's hands shook, but he forced himself to focus. He grabbed the module, feeling its broken connections, its damaged circuits. And then, something happened. The golden energy inside him reacted. Without thinking, Sarek reached deep inside himself. And the ship responded. Lights flickered. The engines hummed to life with new power. Kane's eyes widened. "What the hell did you just do?" Sarek stared at his own hands. I don't know." Kane didn't have time to question it. He slammed the boosters, sending them rocketing out of the asteroid field. The Kregorian ships fired a last desperate barrage. But they missed. The freighter vanished into deep space. A new beginning, a new war. Silence. For the first time since the battle began, there was only silence. Sarek's breathing was ragged. His body felt different. Lighter, stronger, but also scared. Kane let out a slow exhale, running a hand over his face. They had escaped. But the war wasn't over. The enemy had let them go. The fleet had found them too fast. And Sarek's power was growing. Kane looked at the boy. No, not a boy anymore. Something else. Something the entire galaxy was afraid of. "You okay, kid?" Sarek met his gaze. He looked older. "No," the boy admitted, "but I will be." Kane nodded. That was enough. For now. He turned toward the stars ahead. There was only one place left to go. A place where they could find answers. A place where they could fight back. Kane gripped the controls. Next stop, Earth. And with that, they disappeared into the void.